Good evening and welcome. Warm welcome to you all. My name is Jan Glazewski. I work upstairs here in this building in the Institute of Marine and Environmental Law, and I have the happy job of chairing this meeting and keeping everybody in order and in time. So I want to thank the organizers, Muriel Argent and her team, on behalf of TEDx Cape Town, for arranging this interesting and stimulating debate. The motion that will be debated tonight is, should animals be off the South African menu? When I first got the email inviting me to do this, I just very quickly looked at it and I thought it was vegetarians against meat eaters. But actually, if you read this very carefully, as lawyers like myself should, the small print, you'll see it's much more subtle than that. But I won't go into that any further. I will leave that to the panelists. So, I will introduce the panelists in a minute, but just some housekeeping. Firstly, please turn off your phones, including myself. Linked to that, this event is being taped and filmed. One or two people have indicated they do not want to appear on camera, and they will not be filmed. If anybody else does not want to appear in the film part of this, please put up your hand now and we'll make sure you're not filmed. Otherwise, we'll take it that you agree. The order of proceedings will be that each team will be given 30 minutes. In other words, each speaker 10 minutes each to speak. I'm going to give an indication to them after 9 minutes that they've got 1 minute left. So I've been asked to keep time very strictly. We will then open the motion to the floor for questions or comments, if you'd like, but preferably questions. And if you are putting a question, then we'd like you to indicate whether you are for or against, but you don't have to, or you might just want some clarification. But it would also help if you address that to a specific panelist. But you don't have to. It could be a general view. At that time, the organizers will also distribute a little voting slip. And you'll be asked to vote for or against or abstain. And those will be collected. I'm just going to ask Muriel, is there any other logistical... Where is Muriel? Is there any other logistical thing I must mention? Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. Slips are on the benches, no photographs, and there are pens on the end. That'll happen in the discussion period. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce the panelists, the debaters, and I'm going to start on my right, and those are for the motion, and I'm going to go in the order that's nearest to me. The first speaker, well, no, not the first speaker, the first person I'm going to introduce is Brett Thompson, right? Brett is a digital marketing manager of Fry's. You might have heard Fry's Guys. He's right in there. He's also the national program manager at Meat Free Mondays, a non-profit organization that has spoken to over 15,000 South Africans, 15,000 South Africans about the devastating impact of livestock. So that's Brett. Next to him is Nikki Botha. She's been involved in fighting for animal rights since 2006. She's been involved in various campaigns, both locally and internationally. She uses media and other platforms to promote compassionate living and respect for all beings, whether human or animal. After years in the corporate industry, she has resigned and quit and now is following her dream and become a vegan chef. And then right at the end, on my far right, is David Benatar. He's head of the Department of Philosophy and well-known professor in philosophy. He's written a number of publications, including Better Never to Have Been, The Harm of Coming into Existence, and he's also a well-known personality in local media, both radio and the press. On the left, on my immediate left, is Angus McIntosh. Angus manages, and you will all have been there, I presume, Spear Wine Farm in Stellenbosch, where he oversees the grass-fed beef cattle, truly free-range chicken-laying hens in their egg mobiles, as well as the vineyards which are being converted to biodynamic status. Before becoming a regenerative farmer, he built clay homes, and before that he sold equities for Goldman Sachs, so he's been around. Next to Angus is Margot Janse. She is an executive chef at the award-winning Relais and Chateau Le Quartier Français in Franschhoek. She has received numerous accolades from some of the world's most respected publications and made many international appearances as a guest chef. It is Margot's belief that food is constantly evolving, and she prides herself on developing exceptional and engaging culinary delights from fresh, locally available produce. So I'm going to be rushing off to her kitchens. And last but not least, on my far left is Jacques Rousseau, who lectures in critical thinking and business ethics at the University of Cape Town. I would imagine that's at the GSB, is that right? Is that the Graduate School of Business?
Faculty of Commerce, yeah.
Faculty of Commerce, okay. He is the founder and chairperson of Free Society Institute, founded in 2009, to promote secular humanism and scientific reasoning in South Africa. He's a regular contributor to public debates in the South African media via columns, op-eds, television, and radio. So with those introductions, ladies and gentlemen, I am now going to ask the first speaker, who will be Angus McIntosh on my left, and he's speaking against the motion. All on my left are speaking against. Over to you.
You're going to press the start button on your stopwatch.
Yeah.
You see Jan flapping a piece of paper to my right. It means I've got a minute left.
Quite right. Okay.
On your marks.
Bo.
Good evening. The first and only thing I'd really like to say is that we are all farmers by proxy. And many of you haven't had the benefit of working for a financial institution, so I'm going to have to explain to you what the principle of proxy means. It is the principle whereby you give someone authority to vote on your behalf. Every single one of us eats. It's not one breatharian in the room. And every single time we eat, we choose the farmer that produces the food that we eat. Most agriculture in the world is produced in a destructive manner. And I'm just going to talk you through a few examples. The first is a question I've already got for the audience, and that is whether or not we lose more topsoil. Topsoil, remember, is the nutritious layer of soil in which we can grow food, or whether we produce more kilograms of food annually in the year. So is it more kgs of food, or is it more topsoil? Take 3 guesses. Do you want to venture a guess? More topsoil lost or more food produced globally? Okay, 20 times more topsoil than kilograms of food produced. In addition to that, autism rates are 1 in 68. 20 years ago, it was 1 in 200,000. Cancer everywhere is on a massive, massive increase from a polluted environment, polluted food, whatever reasons. The greatest growth in the speciality of medicine is in oncology, which is fighting cancer. There are 405 dead zones in the world. The biggest dead zone is in a thing called the Gulf of Mexico, which is bigger than Gauteng. So Gauteng, you've got to drive from Felice, you drive through Joburg, over the Boerewors Curtain, you keep going past Pretoria, you end up in Limpopo. It's a very, very big place. The dead zone is what's called a hypoxic zone. There is no life in it. No oxygen, no fish, no crustaceans. It is directly attributable to the runoff of fertilizers and chemicals, but particularly nitrogen-based fertilizers that are used in conventional agriculture. We are all farmers by proxy. We all choose which farmer produces our food. The last thing I wanted to mention is that breast milk, which is supposedly human breast milk, which is supposedly the purest creation, now has up to 200 different residues of pesticides, insecticides, and the latest to be found is a product called Roundup, which most of you have probably ingested. It is very widely used in agriculture. It's very widely used in gardens, and in fact, Kirstenbosch use it liberally just up the road. There are also equal amounts of people in the world dying of obesity and starvation. Now, these systems I've been talking about are confined animal operations. They are very heavily chemically dependent. The rainforest is cut down to plant soya and grain to feed these animals. However, there is a thing called regenerative agriculture, which reverses this terrible form of agriculture. It produces food that is nutritious. And the animal, and the first point about regenerative agriculture is that it cannot happen without animals. We practice regenerative agriculture on the farm. We use chickens and cattle. We do a thing called what's called high-density grazing. We have, on a little 75-hectare block, sequestered carbon of 8,000 tons, which basically means that it's the equivalent carbon generated by 4,000 people flying to London and back. That carbon's been stored in the soil through livestock. The second point about having animals in regenerative agriculture is that the best compost, which is a food for the soil in which you grow this nutritious food, is made with animal manure. You can make iffy compost with plant manure, but really proper compost, you need animal manure for that. I just also want to contrast the specific beef story with reference to the point I was making about all being farmers by proxy. So you can choose to buy conventional beef, which is animals confined in a feedlot, terrible pollution problems. They fed grain, which they're not designed to eat, and then they fed asthma drugs at the end of their life that really help them put on muscle very quickly. All of that contributes to the things I was referring to earlier. Or you can choose to eat grass-fed beef, raised in a manner that regenerates the soil, the food that is nutritious. The omega-3s and 6 are in balance in grass-fed beef. In grain-fed beef, the omega-6 ratio is out. There's problems with CLA and the fat content. In fact, the second most detailed study of dietary study of all time is a book called the China Study. And the China Study basically proves that feedlot meat causes cancer. It's a very interesting book to read by a guy called Colin Campbell. Again, you're a farmer by proxy. Your choice is eat the normal beef you buy in the shops or at your butcher, or support a system that regenerates agriculture. You make the choice. No one's forcing you to choose what food to eat. The next point I wanted to make, talking about books, was this one, which is a book called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, which is the greatest or most complete dietary study ever done. A man called Weston A. Price traveled the world in the 1930s for about 8 years. And every place he found Western culture and Western food, processed foods, sugar, denatured grains, etc., there were problems in the society and problems in health. Whereas he found people who in his book refers to as primitive societies, untouched by the West, where they had no childbirth problems, they had no child conception problems, they had no dental problems, none of them needed pills, and the society was healthy. And we often think about food, but how often do we think about the health of a society as a reflection of the food that it consumes? And the second point related to this discussion, to the topic, is that not one society that he found in here was vegetarian, healthy society. Okay, so I've got 5 points I just want to rehash. The first is we're all farmers by proxy. The second is that agriculture is bad. The third point is regenerative agriculture makes agriculture less bad, but it needs animals. The third point is there's never been a healthy society that's been vegetarian. And the fifth point is we're all farmers by proxy.
Thank you, Angus, for keeping to your time and also for setting a good example, which I forgot to mention, and that is please all the panelists speak close to the mic to catch the proceedings on tape. Set my little stopwatch again. So now we're going to hear from Brett Thompson, who's going to be talking about for the for the motion. So over to you, Brett.
Thank you very much. Angus, do you want to come sit on this side? Oh, no. Just want to say one thing. I used to go to UCT, and two of my professors are on this panel, or on either side of me. So if I'm a bit nervous, please bear with me. Also, I'm certain the last time I was in this venue, I failed an exam. What are some of the biggest challenges we as South Africans face every single day? What are those environmental challenges? Climate change, disease, world hunger, deforestation, Justin Bieber. Selfies? No. Tonight I'm going to argue that the consumption of animal products and the using of meat on our menus is the leading cause of all environmental problems on this planet, and is also it's actually exacerbating every single one of those problems. The Earth is getting warmer. No one can debate that anymore. 97% of climate scientists now agree that the Earth is getting warmer and man is the cause of it, and woman. 150 years ago, well, in the last 150 years, the planet has increased in temperature by 1 degree. Now that doesn't really sound like a lot to you or me, but 1 degree has massive ramifications on our planet on a global scale. In the last 20 years, extreme weather events have increased by 230%. And that's droughts and that's floods. Hurricanes are becoming longer, the hurricane season's becoming longer, and it's all because of man-made reasons. So, what is the problem? What is the cause of greenhouse gases? Does anyone know? What is the number one cause of greenhouse gases on this planet? Methane from cars. Farting cars, there we go. Methane. Okay, so I did some research the other day, because I don't have much of a social life, and I wanted to find out how many times a person farts a day. You or me, how many times? You want to guess? It's 14 times, okay? So firstly, someone has gone and dedicated their lives to studying how many times a person has farted, so let's just realize that. A person farts 14 times a day, and there's 7 billion people on the planet. I had curry for lunch, so I apologize. A cow produces 500 liters of methane every single day. We raise for slaughter 70 billion animals every single year. South Africans alone slaughter 2 billion animals every single year. We eat 2.5 million chickens each day because it's finger-licking good. Now, CO2, which you guys are all familiar with, lasts in the atmosphere for about a couple of hundred years, okay? And that comes from the burning of fossil fuels. Methane, well, methane's 72 times as strong in warming the atmosphere compared to carbon dioxide. And that comes from cows, as we discussed earlier, and other livestock, from farting. If you decide today to drop meat from your menu, you will make a difference in 5 years, because methane falls out the atmosphere in 5 years' time. Now, moving on to land use. 30% of the land right now is dedicated to livestock. 30% of usable land is dedicated to livestock. Every second, an area the size of a football field in the Amazon is cleared to produce 250 burgers. Every second. Now, another problem is that water usage. Okay, To produce 1 kilogram of beef requires 16,000 liters of water. That's a couple of swimming pools. To produce a loaf of bread is about 200 liters. The South African Local Government Association says that we have a water crisis looming. I disagree. We just need to change the demand. You heard earlier from Angus about the dead zones that are happening around the planet. And he's 100% right in saying that's caused by agriculture. And it's also caused by fishing and overfishing, really. People ask me, if they find out that I don't eat meat, they say, well, you eat fish, right? And I say, no. Well, have you not seen Finding Nemo? They are adorable. And then I also mentioned, but it's the practices that we're doing with our fishing techniques. Longline fishing, purse seine nets, and drag nets are deemed sustainable by most fishing organizations around the planet. Let me just give you an example of what a long line is. Okay, just off the coastline of South Africa, to catch hake, they will drop a ship or drop a line. It'll go 150 kilometers, and there will be 3,000 hooks on that, and it will catch anything. It doesn't discriminate. For every 1 kilogram of bycatch caught, for every 1 kilogram of fish caught, there are 10 kilograms of bycatch caught. And bycatch is whales, dolphins, turtles, you name it. Imagine if I took a bucky and drove to Robertson with a rope and 3,000 hooks on it. You'd throw me in jail. I want to now talk to you guys about free-range farming. Firstly, free-range meat in South Africa is very, very rare. Excuse the pun. It's not available in retail. It's only available in certain niche markets, like the one that Angus would cater to. On the shelves in Pick n Pay and in the shops that you go to, by their own admission, 80% roughly is factory farmed. If you were to convert the demand for meat and try and make it sustainable by using free range, we just don't have enough space. Globally, if we had to do it, we would need another planet to put all our cows and chickens and pigs. So not only is it not sustainable, but raising animals for agriculture using free range is actually more harmful for the environment. So I'm going to go against what was said earlier. That's because a cow raised under free range conditions produces up to 50 to 60% more greenhouse gases than a cow raised in factory conditions. And that goes the same for pigs and chickens. They also require a lot more water because it lives for a lot longer. The animals that we eat, a cow, for instance, lives for about 4 years. So you've got to feed and not clothe. It's got some hair on already. But give it water, you've got to give it shelter for 4 years. Doing that in the free-range condition requires more resources. Check my notes here. And finally, I just want to talk about humanity for a bit. We feed a third of our cereal and grain to cows, chickens, and pigs, while 1 billion people on this planet are starving. A quarter of the grain grown in developing countries, such as South Africa or Central Africa, where people are hungry, where people go hungry, we take that food and we feed it to animals in America and in South Africa to feed meat, to feed our addiction to meat. It's just not a fair system. We're also taking all our antibiotics and feeding it to animals. 60% of all antibiotics in South Africa are put into feed, which then gets given to animals, and then in turn we eat it. So in closing, I just want to say, by switching to a plant-based diet, you have the biggest positive impact on your planet. Just by taking 1 day a week is a start, but every single time you sit down at the dinner table, you're making a positive impact if you choose plants over meat. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brett, again for not necessitating me waving my white paper around, but be that as it may. Our next panelist will be Marco on my left, speaking against the motion. Over to you.
Thank you. I'm a chef, and I clearly like cooking. I also like eating. I also really, really like living in a democracy, because it means I can sit here and have the freedom of speech. And with that, for me, really comes the freedom of choice. I have allergic reactions to being told that I can or can't do something, that I can or can't eat something. And that doesn't mean I'm a rebel, not at all. I agree with a lot of things you've just said. I agree with a lot of things that Angus has just said, but please don't tell me what I should or shouldn't eat. Just as cows are not made to eat grain, we are not made to eat just plants. Our digestive system is made to eat meat. It's not complicated enough to go through that whole long process of breaking down fibers. But it doesn't mean that I have an issue with it if you do not want to eat meat. I think the fact that we're sitting here debating for, against, is a little bit silly, because it causes a divide. And I don't think the divide is going to solve the problem that we are discussing here. I think we should collaborate with how can we actually make it better. I'm also a mother. I have a little boy who's 9. And I'm the wife to a man who doesn't eat meat. And it's never ever caused a single problem in our household. I don't force him and he doesn't force me. We can eat what we eat and we eat around it. That doesn't take away anything from the magnitude of the issues that you've mentioned. But I think by going radical or in some way dictatorial and saying no more, I do not think that solves the problem whatsoever. What will solve the problem is if we all truly start questioning what we put inside our bodies. We all have a responsibility. You can call it being a farmer by proxy. There is a lot of nonsense going into our systems. And if you don't question it, you don't know. But by forcing people not to eat meat, they're going to want to eat it more. Because that's human nature. So if we say no more meat on the menu, then people will probably find illegal eateries where you're roasting a cow in the back or something like that. Because that's human nature. If you can't have it, you want it. So we should instead, we really should say, what are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to achieve? First of all, with this debate, it's really to solve the problem of this industrial farming, of this, I don't know, people are... I grew up in a household where it was all about moderation. I grew up in Holland, and the amount of animal protein that was calculated by my mother when she went to the shop was 100 grams per person. South Africa laughs at that. But it's probably still what I eat. I think people need about 75, maybe 80 grams of animal protein per day. And I think we've gone over the top. We are not thinking about what we are putting in our systems. If we are talking about taking meat off the menu, is McDonald's included in that? Because then I have a hell of a lot to say about it. And I'll say yes, because it's not good for you. And I've been advocating a lot. If you please think about what you're putting into your mouth, into your system. Think where it came from, think of the impact it had, but what is the impact on you that's digesting it? And if we can only, or if we should, eat the meat that is certainly maybe a niche market, because it's more expensive, then let's eat less. I agree. I don't have to eat meat every day. I don't want to say we have to have meat on the menu or animal protein, not at all. But we have to have a choice, and that choice has to be calculated. It has to be researched. If we take meat off the menu, what do we serve instead? We're going to force feed people morality? It's not going to work. If you don't believe it, you're not going to live it. You have to understand the magnitude of the problem, and you have to educate people. Now, adults and habits, I don't know. It's tricky, but there are a lot of children out there. And I tell you, my child knows what is good for him. He's only 9. But when we drive past a McDonald's, he goes, fake food, fake food. He won't go there. When parents want to take him there, he says, no, I'm not eating that. It's going to make me sick. And I think that's where our responsibility lies. And we have to stop wasting. We have to stop wasting. I serve meat on my menu, animal protein. We don't waste one bit of an animal. I get in a lot of whole animals. I get in a lot of large pieces of animals because the whole animal is a little bit too big. But we do not waste. And I know every single farmer where my animals come from. And that is responsible choices. And that's what I believe. The way to win this is to collaborate and to educate and to really live with respect for each other, respect for yourself, and respect for the animals that we are serving. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And our next speaker will be Nikki Puerta, speaking for the motion. Over to you.
Thank you. Tonight, I speak on behalf of the animals, and I do hope I'll make them proud. And to all of you who took the time out to be here tonight to listen to their message, our deepest gratitude to you. One of the fundamental differences between humans and non-humans on an ethical, moral, and legal level is the right to choice. And we as humans, the supposed intelligent species, who, might I add, is willingly and knowingly destroying the only habitat we have, choose to exercise this right in a sadistic, selfish, damaging, and lethal manner with no regards to those we inflict the damage upon. We have, as a species, have become so arrogant that we consciously choose to condemn others to death for our own pleasure. In short, we can no longer call ourselves the human species. We have become that which we so easily and loudly condemn, inhuman. We are now the inhuman species. This is demonstrated daily in the most basic of needs, food. Many of you here will no doubt say, I love meat. I'm here to tell you, you don't. No, I don't know you. And no, I don't know what your favorite dish is, but I can tell you with absolute certainty that you do not like meat. Let me explain. If I gave you a piece of raw meat, no salt, no spices, no marinade, no sauce, chances are you would grimace and refuse to eat it. But add some spices, some salt, a nice marinade, maybe a sauce, and voila, you love meat. No. No, sir. No, madam. You like the spices and everything that comes with that, not the meat itself. Those spices and sauces can be used in dishes that contain no animal products. Yet, chances are, if I present you with a vegan steak, you will look at it with skepticism and ridicule. Why? Because that is how you were indoctrinated from the moment that you swallowed your first solids. Meat, apparently, is a must. Bullying is defined as forcibly imposing your will on another at their expense for your own gain and pleasure. Eating meat is an extreme form of bullying. In this case, your victim paid the ultimate price. He or she paid for it with her or his life. Your victim had no choice. Do unto others, right? Well, I suppose it only counts when you're not the victim. So what have we as humans become? Have we become so callous that the life of another doesn't warrant the slightest regard? Non-human animals bleed the same way human animals do. And trust me, they fear death the same way you do. The bottom line is, it is totally and utterly unnecessary to eat animals and their products. I, and millions of others like myself, are living proof that we can live a full, healthy life without animals on our plates. And if I'm not proof enough, consider the fact that science provides us with irrefutable proof that vegan is healthier and that veganism is a savior of this planet. I can throw a bunch of statistics at you, easily, but I don't want to reduce veganism to a bunch of numbers. There are more reasons, scientifically and ethically, to opt for veganism than there are to opt for eating meat. If you want to ignore science and the ethics, then consider the most important reason of all: your humanity. Reclaim your humanity. Compassion isn't just a 10-letter word. It's not even a choice. It's a duty. We have an obligation, a duty, to be kind, to be considerate, and to be less selfish. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we lived in a world where those qualities were the rule rather than the exception? And you know what? It starts on your plate. So let's break the vicious, violent cycle. Let's get a product of exploitation and destruction off our menus and out of our lives. If you believe you are what you eat, then the flesh of another obtained through violence, blood, fear, and death shouldn't even be a consideration. Veganism isn't the worst thing that can happen to you. So since you don't like meat, since you don't condone cruelty, and since science shows us that getting animals off our menus is the best way to go, then why not just go vegan? If not for the animals, for you. Exercise your right to choice in a kind, gentle, and selfless way. Choose vegan. It literally changes lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki, for that. And now, for our last speaker on my left, for the people against, we will hear from Jacques.
Thank you. I'd like to start by just drawing a distinction. Our topic here is, should animals be off menus, which is not quite the same thing as should we be allowed to eat animals. And the reason why I'm drawing attention to this distinction is that if it's possible, for example, that there be one restaurant per city that serves meat, that of course raises the possibility that you could have a very small farm, only a few animals, and we could mitigate a lot of these climate problems, etc. I'm not saying that's realistic. I'm just saying that if animals should be off the menu is a different question to whether we should eat meat generally. So there's a range of empirical questions one needs to ask about how much meat can be farmed or raised before certain problems occur, and how much, where that line is, in a sense. Okay, so please keep that in mind. I'm skirting on most of those empirical issues in order to highlight what I consider to be the ethical or moral aspects as to why we should be able to contemplate that it's possible that meat could be eaten under certain circumstances. And I would start by acknowledging that I do think that much of our current meat consumption is immoral. I think that feeding ourselves non-human animals in the scale that we do involves unavoidable and extremely unpleasant amounts of suffering, and I think that that's unconscionable that we tolerate that. But so even if it is immoral to eat non-human animals in the way that we currently do, under the conditions that we currently do, like factory farming, it doesn't, of course, follow that eating meat is necessarily immoral, and nor that it's immoral to sell meat or have it on your restaurant table. So that's the first issue. If it's possible to produce meat in a way that is humane, then we shouldn't make eating that kind of meat, the meat that is produced in that fashion, impermissible in an attempt to cut down on the meat that is being produced in a way that is morally impermissible, that is morally abhorrent. It's clear to me that we need to respect sentience. In other words, we need to respect the idea that animals feel pain and feel pleasures. So however we do this, however we do farm and however we do consume non-human animal products, we need to avoid unnecessary animal suffering, ideally avoid all suffering in all the things we do, whether it involves this debate or any other. But sentience is not the same thing as self-awareness, and this, I think, is the key thing I want to talk about tonight. Sentience, the ability to feel pain and pleasure, is not the same thing as understanding, as having goals and aspirations, as having even a concept of a life, of knowing that you have a life to be snuffed out. For animals that are not self-aware, and here there are a range of empirical issues that are really difficult, and we won't go into them in great detail now, but for animals that are not self-aware, I believe there are such animals. So there are various ways of establishing this. One way that's quite popular is what's called the mirror test, so in other words, being able to recognize oneself in a mirror. There's some animals that pass this, so dolphins, whales, Asian elephants, not African elephants, the European magpie. There are various animals that pass this test. Chickens don't pass this test. Cows don't pass this test. Pigs are ambiguous at this point. Our moral judgments need to be responsive to evidence, is a key point that I'd like to make. Things that are not self-aware, assuming they can be killed without pain, I don't see the grounding of a moral obligation to not eat those animals. I can see there being aesthetic repulsion, I can see there being preferences in these regards, but I don't see what grounds a moral obligation to refrain from killing these animals in a pain-free way, as long as one can, of course, farm them in a pain-free way. To put it bluntly, having a choice, i.e. the choice of veganism or vegetarianism, doesn't yet entail a moral obligation to make that particular choice. It's one of a range of choices, and we need to argue for why that is the better choice than any other one. So, to summarize that bit of what I was saying, animals who are not self-aware are not morally equivalent to us. Okay, so the same sorts of standards as to how we might treat animals that are self-aware and human sorts of animals are not, there's no equivalence there. To put it even more crudely, our own interests, no matter how base you might consider those interests to be, trump the interests of something that does not have any interests. So for the animals that, as I was saying, we do cause a lot of suffering, and that's an unacceptable situation. So while we are imagining the construction of some sort of perfect world in which the suffering is abolished, in the meanwhile, we can't carry on just factory farming and eating the amount that we do. And I think there are various ways we can mitigate that as well. Myself, as a meat eater, would be quite happy if we were to raise the prices of meat dramatically and make it something that you no longer feel entitled to eat. And with the extra revenue that's raised through such a prohibitive sort of increase in price, you can ensure that there are enough inspectors to go around to farms and make sure that people are not abusing animals and not raising them in these abusive sorts of conditions. I'm suggesting behavior modification. I'm suggesting that we nudge people into a more responsible and humane way of doing this. I think a utilitarian approach here argues for a tapering off rather than a managed tapering off rather than an abolition of meat production and sale. I think we'd be passing up people are going to be eating meat in any case, basically. And I think we'd be passing up an opportunity to enhance animal welfare if we don't do things like increase meat to disincentivize its consumption and use that money responsibly. We can't farm and eat dolphins, ever, I don't think. As I was saying, I don't see any reason why cows and chickens are off limits, with the proviso that we respect their capacity to feel pains and pleasures. And I need to also state that we should evolve these positions as animal welfare science evolves. If we discover that more animals are self-aware than we think, then of course we need to revise our views on those too. And lastly, we should also, of course, bear in mind this is, of course, not animals. I'm talking now about cloned meat. Once we start developing synthetic meats, we'll again need to revise our positions here, because animals won't be killed at all, and we'll be eating things that look like steak and taste like steak, regardless of whether you like steak or not. I'll leave that choice to you as to whether you like it or not. But thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Jacques. And now for our last but not least panel, David Benatar, speaking for the motion.
Thanks. So there is a distinction, I think, to be drawn between whether meat should be off the menu and whether we should eat meat. But I think that may be too pedantic a distinction for our purposes. The way I've understood the topic is to put it, is just kind of interesting way of putting the question about whether we should be eating meat. So I've understood the question in that way. You might draw the distinction, but I don't think we need to draw that particular distinction in this case. There are lots of good arguments for why we shouldn't be eating animals, for why they should be off the menu. Some of those are environmental arguments, which Brett has eloquently presented to us. Others are health arguments, which we've heard some about this evening. In general, it is a healthier lifestyle, both for the individual consumer, but also for our species, because there are lots of diseases, infectious diseases, zoonotic diseases, that originate from animals and jump the species barrier to humans, and they do so because of our consumption of meat, especially on a large scale. And we could avoid these sorts of problems. But I want to focus on what I take to be the heart of the ethical question, and that is to say our treatment of animals themselves. And there are millions of animals, billions of animals in fact, many billions of animals that are killed every year for human consumption. Let me focus just on South Africa. In South Africa, well in excess of 1 billion animals are killed annually for food, after having lived lives of misery and torment. That's 2.6 million pigs, 2.9 million cattle and calves, over 6 billion sheep, lambs and goats, 1 billion broiler chickens, and about 480 million fish. They don't count the individual fish, of course, but we can calculate it from tonnage and then the average size of fish. So large numbers of animals are killed. Excepting the fish, most of them have suffered unbearably during the course of their lives. It's interesting that in the debate tonight, there seems to be agreement that the suffering is unacceptable. And I'm not going to therefore focus on the suffering. Let's just take that as a given, that it is unacceptable. We're not in debate about that. Of course, there's some practical implications of that. If you think the suffering is unacceptable, then there are immediate changes you have to make to your diet. You can't say, I'm opposed to suffering. I don't believe we should be eating animals that have suffered, and yet continue about your ordinary shopping and eating habits. If you're serious about this, if this is an argument that you're seriously committed to, then you need to recognize, if I'm going to eat meat, I've got to source it from these very rare outlets that Brett was speaking about. So there are practical implications here. You can't hide the generalized activity of eating meat behind this caveat that there may be some circumstances in which you think it is permissible. Now, clearly we're treating animals in ways in which we would never treat human beings. So let's set the suffering issue aside and let's look at just the killing of animals. Let's assume they could be reared painlessly, and let's assume that they could be killed painlessly as well. I don't think that's actually possible on the scale that currently predominates, but let's assume that you could eat much less meat and eat it from animals that have been sourced in this way. Would that be acceptable? Well, let me ask you this. Would it be acceptable to eat humans that had been reared humanely and then slaughtered humanely? And I don't think that anybody here in this room would seriously say that that would be acceptable. And so the question is, what is the difference between a non-human animal and a human animal that can justify this differential treatment? One characteristic that somebody might suggest is that humans have high-level cognition than animals do. This is the very argument that Jacques Rousseau was referring to. Humans are self-aware in the way in which many animals are not. This argument, though, is an unfortunate one because clearly the elevated cognition is not a mechanism for separating all humans from all non-human animals. There are many humans that don't have these higher order levels of cognition, that are not self-aware. It's true of all human babies, but if you think you want to invoke a kind of potentiality argument and say that those babies have the potential to be self-aware, well, it's certainly not true of some babies, those who will never develop those capacities. It's also not true of those human beings that have lost the capacity of self-awareness or have lost the higher levels of cognition. They don't have this very feature which you are suggesting would differentiate humans from animals and thereby warrant the painless killing of the animals. If you thought that cognition, self-awareness, that these things really were what counts, then you would need to say that it is okay to kill humans who fit into the category of not being self-aware, as long as you did it painlessly after having reared them painlessly. I don't think there are very many people who are willing to accept that implication, and those who say they're willing to accept that implication are probably hiding behind the cover of it being legally prohibited, and therefore in practice not being committed to testing this declaration that they make. So why should we not kill sentient beings that are capable of feeling, of experiencing, whether they be humans or non-human animals? Well, Jacques Rousseau's introduced the idea that because they're not self-aware, perhaps it is okay to kill these beings. And I can't give you a knockdown argument, a definitive argument to say that killing these beings is wrong. I can't even give you a knockdown definitive argument that killing one of you or killing me would be wrong. There's an interesting philosophical argument, an ancient philosophical argument, which says that death is never a harm. Dying in certain ways may be harmful, but ending somebody's life, somebody dying, even painlessly, is not harmful. There's an interesting argument for that conclusion. I'm not going to elaborate on that now. The point is that we can't be sure that that argument works. There's lots of ongoing philosophical debate about an argument of that kind, and we're certainly not going to err on the side of being cavalier and taking lives in the hope that this argument is true. When we've got a kind of contested philosophical issue of this kind, you want to err on the side of caution, I think. And the side of caution here is to say, well, maybe it's not a harm for me to kill you painlessly in your sleep, but I could be wrong about that. And if I could be wrong about that and I've killed you, I may have done something very, very serious to you, so I ought to desist really from killing you. And I would say something similar about an animal that's not self-aware and a human that's not self-aware. Perhaps we do no harm to them by killing them painlessly. But there's no knockdown argument for that, and we should err on the side of caution, particularly since we can err on the side of caution, particularly since we can meet all our dietary needs, we can live perfectly healthy lives without consuming the flesh of animals, whether they be human animals or non-human animals. So I don't think that if we focus just on the death question, we've got a compelling argument here for permitting even restricted consumption of animal flesh. There may be those very rare occasions where you, let's say, grow the meat in a petri dish, some sort of futuristic picture, but then similarly growing the human flesh in a petri dish might also be acceptable from a moral point of view, might be. There are other arguments we can investigate there, but that's science fiction for now. Certainly we don't have meat of that kind on a large scale, so we can set those kinds of concerns aside. Perhaps there may be an argument to be made about eating roadkill, an animal that's been killed accidentally. But then again, similar arguments might apply to eating humans that are being killed accidentally. Those raise a separate set of ethical questions, ones that I'm not going to engage this evening. But to kill an animal in order to satisfy your nutritional desires, not your nutritional needs, that seems to me to be completely unacceptable. Now, there are lots of fallacious arguments that have been presented to us tonight. Let me know when that 9 minutes is up and I'll speak till then. Because there are many more than we have time for. Yes, we do live in a democracy, and in democracy you do have freedom of speech granted to you. And you also have freedom of choice, but within constraints. So my freedom to choose does not include the choice to kill you. If I want to kill you, a democratic society is justified in stopping my doing that, even if I protest that I'm doing it painlessly to you. Might bring a great amount of pleasure to me, but I'm still not allowed to do it. So democracy has its limitations. We've also had some false dichotomies presented to us. So we've been told, for example, that the choice is between eating meat that comes from factory farms or eating meat that comes from sustainable sources. That's what we call a false dichotomy. It's not the only choice that we have. We have a third option, and the third option is to desist from animal consumption entirely. One final point, since my time is nearly up. I have not made the claim that the lives of those beings that are not self-aware have the same value as the lives of beings that are self-aware. It's entirely possible that self-aware beings have more value than those that are not self-aware. But that doesn't mean to say that those that are not self-aware have no value. And when we're speaking about just desires, you want to satisfy a desire to eat flesh, then you don't have a good reason for overriding the value that animal life has. It has all the value that animal sees in it. That life is all that animal has, and it cares a great deal about it, even if not as much as you do about your life. Thank you.
Well, thank you. We are kind of just halfway, and we've done the major part of the proceedings, but I emphasize we're only halfway. But I think this is an opportune time to actually thank all of the panelists and give them a round of applause for what I call I was going to say they've given us much food for thought. So the proceedings will now be about 45 minutes or so, depending on you guys actually, of questions and comments, if you like. And then we will have, if the panelists want, we have another round, a short round of 2 minutes to summarize. But right now we're going to give you the opportunity to vote. And I urge you, as I did at the outset, read the motion very carefully before you cast your vote. In fact, I'll read it once again. 7 words.
The email from Muriel this morning said that we would now have a 2-minute recap before you open it to the floor.
Let me just clarify that with Muriel. Do you want the 2-minute recap now? Is it questions now from the audience? Between each other? Okay. Sorry, I missed that part. So you're going to clarify, you can ask each other questions from the left to the right and vice versa. Would you like to start, Angus?
Clarifying questions? No, I mean, there's just a few statements that have been made that are completely factually incorrect.
I'll allow that. You can make a few
this
statements.
This is the opportunity to talk to them.
You can make a statement if you like, a statement or two.
Okay, so the first statement was made that the cattle live for, I mean, these are all technical cattle questions, but the cattle live for 4 years. They don't. They live for less than a year in a feedlot. And on my farm, they live up to 2 years. The water issue is nonsense because the cattle that are on grass, the rain provides that water and you'll irrigate for a part of the year. I have every single year irrigated less as the humus in my soil has increased compared to a grain-fed system where there's a huge amount of water used. So, you know, what this really touches at, and I regret that I didn't really emphasize this point, is that within farming, there's very, very destructive farming, both supported by vegetarians and meat eaters. If you, as a vegetarian, which, thank you for making the false dichotomy point, perfectly entitled to choose your spinach, if you choose spinach that's been grown conventionally, it is riddled with chemicals, it has been farmed with nitrogen fertilizers that destroy the carbon in the soil, that contribute to dead zones. Whereas if you have chosen organic or even better biodynamic spinach, it hasn't been grown with any of that. The nutritional profile of the vegetable is entirely different. And you know, for me, that's really lacking in this discussion this evening.
Okay, thank you for that. Would anybody on my right like to respond? Brett?
I think that was directed at my obviously it was directed at my statements. Yeah, we can argue on how long a cow lives, and that's just technical kind of speech, as you said. But the matter of fact is you still got to slaughter the cow. And to slaughter, again, this is my statistics, so we can talk about it afterwards, but to slaughter a cow, it requires about 2,000 liters of water. And we kill, in South Africa, as mentioned by Prof. Benatar, upwards of 2 million cows a year. So if we had it all switch to a sustainable free range, they still would require a lot of water. That's it.
Thank you, Brett. Would anybody else on my left, Jacques or Marco, Jacques, do you want to say that? Jacques wants to say
Thank you. I'd like to take the chance just to clarify 2 things in response to some of the things that Prof. Benatar was saying. I don't think the distinction I drew is pedantic. I think that the keeping animals off the menu, if you do that, if you leave them on the menu, we have the chance at the revenue, at the improving the standards monitoring and the treatment of animals. If we take them off the menu, it's an unregulated space where we increase our disease risk. You don't know how people are raising animals and how they're slaughtering them and so forth. And I think we also have no control over potential animal suffering. So it might not be as important a distinction as I'd like it to be, but I don't think it's a pedantic one. I think that keeping them off the menu means that they're in an unregulated space. On a menu is a regulated space, because they're going through some sort of supply chain.
Thank you.
Yeah. And the second thing is, of course, I accept that human animals can lack self-awareness and can be in the same moral category, but I think that we have moral duties both towards agents and towards a moral community as well. So it's not that a baby has potential that's of interest to me. You're making a wager there. You are taking a chance that it might or might not. But my moral duty there is towards the community, towards the species, rather than towards that baby. I don't think I have a moral obligation towards that baby or towards that grandmother.
Thank you. David, would you like to respond?
Absolutely. So first of all, we can have a debate now about what exactly this motion is. But when you ask whether animals should be off the menu, you can understand that in different ways. One way you can understand is it should be off your menu. It should be off the personal menu. And then your points don't apply at all.
Right.
If, on the other hand, you say they should be off the public menu, then your points may have some force and we could debate them. I'm not convinced that they do, in fact, have force under those circumstances. So we've got a point of interpretation here about what we mean by the motion. And since we don't get to decide for other people about what they eat, I've understood this as a personal menu. You can go home tonight and you can make a decision about what you'll do. And so I've understood this as the personal menu. Should it be on your menu? I, of course, am entirely familiar with the arguments about the moral community, but I find them spurious. I find them a distraction, really, because different people have different senses of what the moral community is. The racist has a very restricted sense of the moral community. Cares about the people in that very limited racial group or ethnic group or tribe, and said, I only care about these beings, so it's okay for me to kill beings of another kind. If you think they ought not to kill beings of the other kind if they're self-aware, you'd have to be, you could say that, well, they're entitled to kill the babies of the other community. That is an implication of your view. Maybe it's one that you could live with. But what we have a question here is about what the nature of the community is. And I think that somebody being a conspecific, somebody being a member of the same species, isn't really that relevant a category. The relevant categories are things like whether you're sentient or not, whether you're sapient or not.
Thank you, David. This discussion raises what I said right at the beginning. This motion is quite subtle, so I urge you to read it very carefully. We haven't heard from two of the panelists. Marge, would you like to say anything further?
Well, I actually, in my, I was going to say something that I didn't because I thought I might freak people out. But with all this extremist kind of, you shouldn't, and should we imply rules about eating meat? So that's in my one ear. And then we have Mr. Noakes saying we shouldn't be eating any carbohydrates. Sorry. And then obviously we have, the whole agricultural issue. So I was thinking maybe we should start eating each other because that'll stop. There's nothing left.
It's not a good means to the desired end.
But it could solve a lot of problems.
But this is a crucial matter, is that if some goal is a desirable goal, it doesn't follow that any means to that goal is morally permissible. There can be impermissible means to a desirable goal.
We still have to eat.
We don't want to have a lot of has-beens, as it were. Nikki, anything to add to?
Yes, please. I just want to direct this one to Dr. Jacques Rousseau and two to Margot. Dr. Rousseau, I'm not an academic by any means. I'm not a critical thinker by any means. I'm sure you can blow me out of the water anytime. But I want to ask you, what do you measure intelligence against? Tests designed by humans? How is that fair in terms of measuring animals against our standards? I mean, what say do they have in that? And then for you, Chef, I take exception, I'm sorry, I have to say this, I take exception to the fact that you think veganism is extreme. What is extreme is killing and consuming the flesh of another being. Compassion is by no means whatsoever extreme. If that is what you think extremism is, then maybe you should redirect your moral compass. Thank you.
I'll allow Jacques and Marco to respond, starting with Jacques.
My response will be quite brief, but my door is always open for non-human animals to come and demonstrate their tests to me.
Marco?
Well, then maybe I used the wrong word by extremist. I actually, on a daily basis, cook for vegetarians, vegans, people that don't do gluten, people that are lactose intolerant or have a aversion to visible onions. And I cook for everybody with the same amount of love and integrity because I want you to have an unbelievable experience in my restaurant. But please do not tell me that I must become a vegan. I'm not telling you that you should be eating meat. And that's what I mean. And maybe extremists is the wrong word. But that is my point. If I'm a Christian and you're Catholic, or you're a Christian and I'm a non-believer, don't tell me what I should believe. Because that is my right of choice. And it has to be done with integrity. And that is my point. As long as integrity is in place, I am listening to you. And I'm not kicking against anything you believe. Nothing. I think you have a lot of points. But that doesn't mean I want to be forced to think the same. I have the right to think differently. So I'm sorry if I called it extremist. It was not meant in a personal way at all.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll allow a short, sharp response if you want, but otherwise, is there
From
any?
me?
If, yeah, sure. Brett? Brett, yeah.
I'm quite an extreme guy, so no, I wear glasses and I work on a computer. The topic of choice also just came up briefly by Margot, and I think by a lot of people on the panel tonight. And I just want to list things that you guys are all aware about: fossil fuels, asbestos, tobacco, landlines. So these things we always used to choose. We used to always choose to have these a while ago, and as we've developed, we've choose not to use them anymore. We've all got cell phones in our pockets now. 20 years ago, you would have thought you're a madman to carry a phone with you. So to say that choice is not relevant and that you shouldn't be told how to choose, I agree with that. But the choices are changing, and as we develop, we will drop meat from our diet. It is the natural progression, just in concept, because technological advance will make it that way. Fossil fuels, we shouldn't be using it because it's polluting our planet. We shouldn't be eating meat because it's polluting our planet. We have to respect future generations. So that's what I just want to speak about choice on. Thank you.
All right, thank you to the panelists again. I think this is an opportune moment to open it to the floor, and it would be nice, and there are roving microphones that will be handed to you. It would be nice, but not compulsory, to say who you are and if you're for or against, and direct your question or comment to either individual panelists or to the fours on my right or to those against on my left. So you can, the lights are in my eyes here, but all right, we'll start here.
Hello. I saw a program recently that said the future of food might be insects. Where do you guys stand on killing of insects?
Do you want to direct that to the fours or against, or everybody in general, all the panelists in general?
To the four.
All right.
So I don't want to eat insects, but that's a preference on my part. I think it's unlikely that those animals have a deep investment in their lives, unlike sort of higher order animals. And obviously there's a spectrum here, and there's going to be a problem with line drawing about precisely where you draw the line. But I think in all cases where there's a doubt, better to err on the side of caution, unless there's some serious moral cost on the other side of the scale. So, I mean, let's imagine you're stranded, let's say, on a deserted island, and you're going to die of malnutrition, and you can choose between eating your fellow passenger who's been stranded or the cow, or the insects, well, yeah, start with the insects. So it's hard to draw a sharp line. I think it's extremely unlikely that insects are deeply invested, though there's presumably some kind of very minimal level of investment.
Thank you, David. Anybody on my left want to respond about the insect question? Angus?
Listen, it all depends on how these insects are farmed. It does. I sound like a tired
Ant farm.
I think we leave it at that.
No. I'll tell you, I know of a very big insect farm that's being planned outside Stellenbosch. I've been involved with them for about 4 years. But the point I'm trying to make is that if it heals the earth, which certain types of farming can, it's a good thing. But veganism and vegetarianism, by definition, doesn't necessarily heal the earth. So this part of insect farming I can tell you about is a thing called agri-protein. They are breeding fly larvae who consume waste, and it's a substitute for fish meal in animal feed. Now, fish meal, as has been referred to many times, is a terrible thing because the oceans are being obliterated. And so in that case, I think it's a good thing to have insect farming.
Thank you for that stimulating question. The lady with the white top here, and her hand is up.
We've got 2 mics up there already.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I can't see because the lights are... Yes.
Hi. Hello, I'm Stefan, and I am for the topic. My question is directed to the meat panel. Specifically, Margot, you stated that you have choice and that you're allergic to being forced to do something. My question to you is then, would you or do you then serve or cook human flesh for consumption?
No, I choose not to.
Yes, but then people force you to not cook humans, but... Like, I'm just trying to make the argument...
Nobody's forced me to cook humans or not cook humans.
Not to cook humans, but you say you're allergic to that. I'm just saying this...
No, I want to have a choice. And I've made it, and that's an educated choice, and that's a cultural choice. I was not taught from a young age to eat my fellow human. So you
choose to eat your fellow non-human?
Yeah,
sorry,
it depends how it was farmed. Sorry, I stole your line there. Yeah, it's a choice.
Thank you, Marco. I think that was a directed question at Marco, so we won't take it further. I'll come back to you. Who's got the mic at the back? All right, go for it. Please bring the mics to the front here. Yes, go for it, please.
My name is John Mountford, and if I was to be on one or either side, just let me get a coin here. No, I would be on that side. And I'll tell you why. This is one of those debates where it seems like science is not helping us at all. Morality is a minefield. We know that should be off the menu, definitely. But science doesn't seem to help us in this debate. And so I would propose that we should go to health and more specifically how we feel as human beings on the diets that we're on. So I would propose that we should change the vote tonight. We should vote on the floor which side of the panelists looks the healthiest. The meat eaters or the non-meat eaters. Whoever wins the debate. Could we do that, please?
And if you abstain, you vote for the chairman, is that right? I'll take that as a comment and not as a question.
I think there's a response.
Okay, thank you. David?
So when we're taking morality off the table, are we taking all other moral judgments off the table as well? So do you want to also abandon any judgments about the morality or otherwise of rape, murder, genocide, assault? Are we removing the moral judgments there as well? Are those also taboo now? Can we make no headway in these matters?
No, only morality that relates to sustaining life, not ruining it, destroying it, and eating sustainable.
No, but I think there's some very clear arguments here about whether we should be eating animals. In fact, they're the very same arguments about whether we should be eating at least those humans that have the same cognitive capacities as animals. And I don't think this is just something up in the air here that we can't think clearly about. I think we can think very clearly about this issue.
Thank you. Brett wants to add to that?
I think you mentioned science can't answer. You were saying science won't help us. I disagree. Firstly, I have a really ratty ginger beard, so I don't think I'll win on the looks department. But the average vegetarian, this is a study done in the United States based on 70,000 people, and the average vegetarian will live 7 to 8 years longer than a meat eater, regardless of diet. Okay? So on health sides, it does favor the vegetarian side, as well as a vegetarian compared to a meat eater in terms of heart disease has a 33% chance smaller chance of getting any form of heart disease. And just in South Africa, I think it's 1 in 4 females will have some form of heart disease before the age of 60, and it's 1 in 3 for men. Heart disease is a Western diet. It doesn't happen in Central Africa. It only happens in Western areas where they eat a predominantly meat diet. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett. The woman in the third row in the white top has had her hand up for a while.
Yes. Okay. My question is for Jacques, Professor Rousseau. First, I'll start with a comment. My comment is that I think your argument is anthropocentric, and so is the mirror test. And the mirror test, one of the biggest flaws of the mirror test is that it only works on animals that uses other senses apart from, that only uses vision as a sense, and that it doesn't work on animals that doesn't use vision as a primary sense. And also my problem with that is that it measures self-awareness the way humans define it. We don't know how animals actually measure their own self-awareness. I don't think they'll keep themselves busy with something as stupid as that. And the second issue I have with the mirror test is that dogs and cats also fail it. Does that mean that you would have it on your menu?
So first, thank you to both you and Nikki, who've sequentially promoted me.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry?
Go ahead.
Because Nikki called me doctor, which is untrue, and you called me professor, which is even more untrue. I'm neither of those things. But thank you nonetheless. No, my view is not anthropocentric. My view is, what would the word be? It's centric towards things that are self-conscious, which is, of course, relevant to your second question. So anything, whether it's a Martian or a cat or a dog or whatever that's self-conscious, my view would privilege them. So it's not about humans. It's about anything which has a certain level of awareness. And then B, on the mirror test, yes, I know. That's why I mentioned that there's a range of these sorts of things, and none of them might be potentially satisfactory. I was making the theoretical point that if we could find a way to differentiate self-consciousness from those lacking self-consciousness, we'd have no argument against, on my view, against eating the non-self-conscious things. So we already have alternatives. We have the mirror test. We have the presence of mirror neurons. We have metacognition. And all of these things might be stacked in some way, and that was part of Nikki's concern about what I was saying, is that they all are interpreted via a human sort of lens, but so are the words that you spoke to me. That's not something we can avoid. Of course we're going to be interpreting everything via a human lens. We have no alternative, so that's not an objection that I can grapple with, and that anybody here can grapple with, because you'd be doing so via human cognition. Oh, dogs and cats. Yeah, as I was saying to David Benatar about marginal humans, I have no moral obligation to dogs and cats in the same way as I don't towards cows and chickens. So, in terms of their personal self-interest, I don't have an obligation to not kill and eat them. I have an aesthetic attachment. I have two cats of my own. The one I ate. That's why I said 3. So I have an aesthetic attraction and devotion to them, and I certainly personalize them all the time, even though I know how irrational that is. But I certainly have no moral argument against killing and eating cats and dogs, and of course we know that people do that in various parts of the world. That's an aesthetic thing, not a moral thing.
Thank you, Jacques. I have quite a few hands up and one at the back. Do you have a mic? The black.
There's been mics allocated already.
Okay, who's got the mic?
Ladies first.
Hello. Hi. I just had a technical question out of interest regarding biodynamic farming. So it's directed at you, Angus. I wanted to know: is it possible to practice regenerative agriculture without eating the animals? So you say that animals are a crucial part of this much better way of farming. Does it necessitate eating them? I'm just curious.
That's directed to Angus.
Sure. Listen, the animals it's going to end its life somehow. Let's just look at a dairy cow. Okay, the average lactation in South Africa is 2.1 years. So that means that the average dairy cow in South Africa is killed after she's 2.1 times lactated. So she's had a calf and she's lactated. And the reason they collapse after that is because they are milked 3 times a day. They fed a heavy grain diet. And a cow on a biodynamic farm will give you 15 years of lactation. Okay? And if she's managed properly, her manure is the cornerstone of specifically the biodynamic compost preparations and biodynamic compost. So she's done a great regenerative job. And then, of course, nutritionally, eating her meat is a very different thing to eating grain-fed beef. But in answer to your question, yes, of course they die at the end of their life.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angus. I am aware of your hands, but I don't know who's got the mic.
Got a mic here.
All right.
Hi. We've heard several sort of categories of arguments. We've heard the humanity side. We've heard the environmental side. And I think everything seems to sway in favour of the veggie side, which I stand for, by the way. But what we haven't really spoken about, and I haven't heard from either panel, is the commercial side. And I just want to make an observation, and I'd like an opinion from both panels. And isn't it fair to say that the 4 meat on the menu is fueled for profit, or fueled by profit? It's because of the heavy investment in the meat trade, in the animal trade, that we have this abundant choice of animal products. And isn't it also fair to say that we have a lack of choice from the vegetarian or vegan side? I speak for myself and others that I know that we would eat, people who generally normally eat animal products would easily eat non-animal products if they had access to it. So I think we haven't actually touched on a real fundamental, and that is most of the issues with diet is a commercial issue, in my opinion. Never mind the humanity and the environmental, because I think that's a given. We already understand, and I mean, the against panel has already confirmed, apart from specialist sort of farming that Angus does, that they're actually against meat on the menu in that way. But what we haven't covered is the commercial side. So
Right.
I'd just like an opinion from both.
Okay, starting, I think the most well-equipped would be Angus, seeing you work at Spear. Could you comment on the commercial side of that?
So I just really want to make one point on the commercial side, and that is that there is a dishonesty of the pricing of food in the market. And let's go back to spinach. Spinach that is conventionally grown with the smorgasbord of toxic chemicals and artificial fertilizers, and spinach that is organically grown through a method that creates humus and sequesters carbon. So carbon that is causing the problem in the atmosphere is put into the soil, etc., should not be priced. And by the way, has multiples more various minerals and is therefore not nutritionally equivalent to conventional spinach. It should not be priced the same way.
But we both have access to spinach easily enough, whether it's organic or not.
Correct.
Organic.
But the point I'm trying to make is that conventional spinach or feedlot beef or factory farmed animals, the environmental damage, if you want to put a price on the humane treatment of the animals, all that stuff is not in the price. The medical cost to obesity, and yes, obesity, there's a meat element, but there's a massive grain and sugar element to obesity, that all of those cancers and things are not in the price. Whereas an organic or biodynamic product is an honestly priced product. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question about commercial stuff, but I think there needs to be more honest accounting for this on this stuff.
I think if there was honest accounting, meat would be unaffordable. Across the board, meat would be unaffordable worldwide if there was honest accounting applied to the real cost.
But you're immediately assuming that and it touches on to a point Brett was making earlier. People come to the farm and the first criticism or observation leveled at me is always organics can't feed the world. Okay? If you allow me a minute just to dissect that canard. The first is that no matter who you speak to today, there is enough food produced to feed between 11 and 14 billion people. So there's not a food production problem anywhere in the world. The wrong food is being produced in the wrong places by the wrong people, in the wrong methods. So with this honest pricing I'm talking about, which is a dream, obviously, but let's hope we can get there, we'll rectify that. You will have more localized production of more nutritionally beneficial food, which is less damaging to the environment. And easily affordable. The issue that Brett mentioned about if everyone goes free range, we don't have enough grass is nonsense. I had a farm on my farm last week. This guy grazes 8 cattle per hectare. Okay, you could grow enough beef to feed the whole of Africa and the Western Cape if it was managed like that. It's entirely possible to do that.
All right, thank you. I would like to have the fours an opportunity to respond. Brett?
So I'll answer from a commercial side. Firstly, you didn't touch on electric spinach. I don't know where that... No? Okay. Anyway, I work for a company called Fry's Family Foods. I think some of you guys are aware of it. We manufacture vegan meat alternatives. So at the moment, we're pretty much the only producer in South Africa. We are experiencing a lot more competition. So there is a growth in the demand for vegan meat alternatives. So I kind of feel that your question, yes, no one touched on it, but I think the choice is coming. So there is a growth in the demand for the market. So the supply will follow that. We manufacture 25 products at the moment. We could probably produce 100 different types if there was the demand. But in store, we only get allocated a shelf space, and that's all we get to play with. With the growth in demand for alternatives to meat, the retailers want to make money, so they will start growing that. So as soon as they grow the category, as soon as consumers in South Africa demand more meat alternatives, more options for meats, there will be higher protein options, and fries is one of them. I just want to give you an example. I recently spent some time in Europe over December last year, and there's a company called Vegans, which is a German vegan chain of supermarkets. It's a fully vegan supermarket, so you can picture it's a little smaller than a Pick n Pay, but it's a fully stocked Pick n Pay which only stocks vegan options. So to say that it's not commercially viable, vegan options will be soon, and it only requires more demand. So it's up to the consumer, really.
Thank you, Brett. This debate about the commercial, or what I could also term the economic aspects, raises a huge area of discussion. So I don't want to stay on it because there are a number of hands up. I'll come to you. Is the mic at the back? The person here, yes? We're coming forward slowly. Can you go ahead?
This is for Jacques. How do you kill animals humanely? Or is this just an in-principle point?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question?
How do you kill animals humanely? Or is it just an in-principle point?
Well, I think it's partly an in-principle point, but secondly, I think that so with cows, for example, the kind of bolt in the back of the head by surprise is I think one of the least painful we have so far. I'm not sure if it's utterly non-painful. You could imagine gassing them. You could imagine poisoning them in their food with something that isn't going to harm humans. I don't know. It's mostly an in-principle, and I haven't studied that, I'm afraid.
Thank you. The mic should be coming forward because I have some... Okay, let's just finish the ones at the back.
Me?
But then we must come forward because there are some hands here. Right at the back there.
That's me.
Yes.
My question is directed at Brett. Brett, I support what you were saying about the damage to the environment and climate control, etc. You also mentioned that cows do a lot of damage through methane. This I understand, and if the objectives were reached that you were suggesting, you would do away with them. But where do you draw the line when it comes to wildlife? How do you accommodate the millions and millions of bovines and wildlife, buffalo, buck species, elephant, who also produce gases? How would you, what would you say to that?
Okay, well, obviously livestock far outweighs wildlife. So there are 70 billion animals raised for livestock and killed each year, and the amount that are alive at the moment are far more than that. So there are 70 billion animals killed for livestock, but there are much more alive at any present time. The amount of animals in the wild, it's marginal. It really, and it's part of an ecosystem, so it's there already. I can't give you the exact figures, but the livestock dwarfs any kind of, firstly, human emissions of methane, as well as wildlife. I trust does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. There's a woman in the third row, and then could you bring the mic to the front row here, because there's a woman who's been anxiously waiting. Okay. So in the third row, the woman in black.
I just want to ask a question. If, according to the meat eaters, okay, first I'd like to say I'm for the veggies. I'd like to say, are you guys against slavery? Just a simple yes or no, that's all. Okay, so look at the animals. They are kept against their will in farms. They are abused. I'm sure you don't nicely call your cow out nicely, saying, come here, my dear, come, let's go outside. I'm sure you hit him and abuse him to come outside there. And am I right or am I wrong? Because
am I allowed a response?
Thank you. I think you made your point.
Yeah,
okay, thanks very much.
Okay, so anytime, you're more than welcome to come visit the farm. We're only 30 minutes out of Cape Town, anytime you want. And you'll see that everything you've said is completely untrue. Okay? And I would suggest that after this presentation, you meet a lady called Louise van der Merwe, who's done more for animal welfare in this country than anybody. Louise regularly comes to my farm. It's a completely open door, and Louise can tell you exactly what happens on my farm. So please, don't paint everything with the same brush.
Okay, but you never answered my part about slavery. I asked in general, are you against slavery? Okay. And okay, now the lady approved and she said, yes, she is against it. Well, I want to know, don't you agree that animals are kept against the will and that is called slavery? Because they are forced to work hard labor for at the end just being killed.
Yeah,
just
so,
for your,
so my cattle aren't doing hard labor. I would really suggest that you come to the farm and we can debate this matter, okay? The cattle are doing what they're supposed to do. My cattle are eating grass. It is a herbivore. The beef that, I'm assuming obviously you don't eat beef, but your family, the beef that the people in your family eat, those cattle have eaten grain. It's not a grainivore. You could possibly equate something like that to slavery, okay? But the cows on my farm are fully being a cow. They're not doing anything that's not cow. And at the same time, they are healing the earth. They are reversing global warming, which your vegetarian option cannot do.
Okay, thank you. I think the point there is we cannot generalize, but there's some anxious people at the back, and I do remember the person in the front. Have you spoken before?
Me? No.
The one with the mic, the man with the mic.
No, I haven't.
Okay, go ahead.
I have a sincere question for the philosopher. With whom I totally agree. I don't eat meat. I eat fries on a daily basis, but I eat fish as well. Because I sort of tend to. It's hard for me because it's hard for me to look at an animal and see the eyes looking at me and think. And I feel I should err on the side of caution, as you said. My dog passes the mirror test, and it makes me so proud. You can really imagine and convince yourself that they do have a certain sense of being aware. But then, if we don't kill animals because we err on the side of caution, it means we can't judge the lion for killing a deer because he should be cautious because that same deer might value his life just as much as the lion does his. And so if that argument was on steroids, it mean we would have a herbivore planet. And we know that's not possible because so we can't just draw the line. It's a grey thing, and the point that I want to make is then that it's a humble position from where you abstain, but you cannot judge. You cannot judge the lion, just as you cannot judge those who eat meat. And so it's my point that the only question really worth arguing is the aggregate question, the macroeconomic question. The personal question is personal to the same extent that religion is personal. It's not, and the one thing that I think the vegetarians sometimes exceed is where they become really, really judgmental. I think there would be far more people not eating meat if the vegetarians weren't so judgmental.
Thank you. You referred to the philosopher, and I assume the philosopher would be David, so a quick, sharp comment from you, please.
Well, there are a range of comments that have been made there, so it's hard to pinpoint exactly what I should be responding to. But first of all, fish, there's very good evidence that fish are capable of feeling pain, that they've got much greater cognitive capacity than they're given credit for. And we also know that they're going to suffer in the ordinary course of events quite terribly in the harvesting. So I think there are good reasons for taking fish off the menu as well. Vegetarians and vegans are often criticized for being judgmental, but that claim that they're judgmental can mean a lot of different things. So if you're saying to me, do I think that people who eat flesh are doing something wrong, I will offer the judgment that yes, they are. Just like when I hear that somebody's been murdered or somebody's been raped, I'll say the people who perpetrated those things did something wrong. I'm being judgmental in that sense. However, there's another sense of judgmental in which I'm not, or less so, because I'm going to recognize the complexities. I'm going to recognize that when people are reared in a society where eating animals is routine, where it's the norm, where you look around you and people who are good, who meet the extensive definition of good, are participating in this practice, it's actually hard for people to see just how terrible it is. It's hard when you're in the thick of it to see it. And so it's not like I have no understanding of where people are coming from and how they fall into these ways and how they can kid themselves into thinking that the practices that they're engaging in are acceptable. But that doesn't mean to say that I'm going to reach the judgment that it's okay for them to do it. Sometimes you need to step back and look at things from a distance. We can do that with the slaveholders, for example. We, looking back at the slaveholders, ask how could they have thought that that practice was acceptable? But we need to recognize that in that society, where all the decent people around you are holding slaves or trading slaves, it's harder for you to see how terrible a practice it is.
Okay,
so we need to differentiate different senses of the word judgmental.
I think you've made your point well. Thank you very much. At last, my new friend in the front here can have a say.
Good evening. I'm Renelwe and I'm a vegetarian. Okay, I have a lot of thoughts running through my mind, so please bear with me as I try and articulate them. This question is directed to all three panelists who are against the motion. So, I mean, one of the questions I personally get asked often as a vegetarian, and I'm surprised it hasn't come up yet, is, but no, plants also are a life form. Why do you think it's okay to kill plants and not animals? Which is quite true because, plants are a life form as much as animals are a life form. But of course, and there have been studies that show that plants have a consciousness as well. So, and as much as Angus speaks about everyone being a farmer by proxy, true enough, we're all killers by necessity though. Because to sustain our human life, which we need to do by eating, it's necessary for us to eat to sustain our human life, we do need to engage in some kind of killing, plants or animals. But what we also all know is that a human life can be sustained completely by a plant-based diet, whereas it can't be sustained completely by a meat diet. So we know that the common denominator there is that we need the plants, and plants are sufficient in and of themselves to sustain human life. So, the level of consciousness, self-consciousness, self-awareness, that varies throughout the different life forms, I agree with that. And what we know as well is that humans are quite intelligent. And with that intelligence comes the ability to discern between what we can and cannot eat or what to choose to eat, freedom of choice as you spoke about. So in having the intelligence to choose, I'm wondering why each of you, either personally or just a more generalized perspective, why do you choose to kill more than is necessary? Because if you can sustain our lives purely on a plant-based diet, then we don't need to kill animals to sustain ourselves. That's purely desire. So why do you think, or why do you believe it's okay to kill more than is necessary?
Okay, thank you. Can we have a short response from maybe each of you, starting with Margot? Would you like to respond?
Because I like to eat it. And that doesn't mean that I have to eat it. I'm strongly considering following a month-long Noakes diet, just so I have a calculated and researched opinion instead of just my thoughts. And I am perfectly happy to do that with a vegetarian diet, because I like it, but there are a lot of things I like, and I have to make sure that I do so with integrity. So if I have stood between the cows and there are no whips and there are no chains, I have looked in the eye of the cow, of which the mince I have fed to my child and myself in the evening, at which I've told my son, remember that cow last week at Angus's farm? Well, this is its meat. It's about respect and no wastage. So if we are going to eat meat, we have to respect where it came from. And I could even go so far as to say, then perhaps we should be killing it ourselves.
Thank you. Jacques?
You ask why we think it's necessary. I think that's the wrong standard. I mean, it's not necessary. It's a choice. As I was saying during my presentation, the fact that we have options doesn't mean that it's compulsory to exercise any one of those particular options. And in this case, I don't think we're doing any necessary harms in killing the animal. We can, in certain contexts, be causing harms, and those are wrong, but killing de facto is not necessarily causing harm to certain kinds of animals. As for plants, I'd just urge you to remember that there are studies and there are studies. I mean, the idea of plants having consciousness doesn't strike me as a very plausible hypothesis.
Thank you. Do you want to add anything, Angus?
Philosophy is not my strong point. I can barely spell it. But the necessary killing, large-scale eco-restoration is only possible with large herds of herbivores. There is no other way to sequester carbon on a big scale. And we need to sequester carbon if we're not to heat the earth. And therefore killing is an essential part of that.
All right, now I have 3 or 4 hands and we are running out of time. Sorry, David?
What I'd like to deny. I don't think it's necessary to kill the animal. I mean, you could allow the animal to live and die.
All right.
Now, you might argue that there's a less incentive for humans to have animals of those kinds around, but then you're just speaking about a broader human problem. Before the human population burgeoned the way it did, there was more natural habitat for all kinds of herbivores than there is now. So I don't think that argument is true. I don't think that we have to be killing animals in order to have this regeneration.
Okay,
but even if it were, there would be the point about the means and the end.
Thank you. There's a lot of hands up and we are running out of the discussion time. Who's got the mic? This woman in the middle. Okay, go for it.
This is for Mr. Rousseau. You seem to overestimate the benefit of regulation to the good of animals. Most of the legal protection currently afforded to animals is through their status as property, and even within that, there's very little enforcement, which is why the conditions exist the way they do in factories. So I think you're making a very, very hypothetical argument when you're talking about them being raised pain-free. That doesn't seem feasible at present, not if there's still a market for meat. And also, I know you were saying this semi-facetiously, at least, but about animals coming to you with proof of intelligence. And there are many animals that are not currently thought to have self-awareness that have. Sorry, I'm quite nervous. That have very sophisticated cognitive skills that humans lack. For example, they perform feats of navigation, which we can't ordinarily do. Even things like, I think there was an article in the news, and a fairly recent New Scientist, about dung beetles navigating by starlight and that kind of thing. You are privileging then language and the other faculties necessary to come to you and explain why they should be taken seriously.
Thank you. I think you've made your point quite clearly. Mr. Rousseau.
So briefly on the first point you make, I agree with you. I agree in the sense that it's entirely possible that animals aren't being monitored and cared for at all as well as I think, but at the same time I didn't tell you how well I think they are being looked after. And I made the argument that if we increase revenue, that we can improve whatever the standards are. So it's entirely possible that the standards are really low and even lower than I think they are. But that wouldn't affect the point that I was making, which is that they could be improved, and the way to do that would be to increase prices on animal products. On the second thing, yes, my standards could be wrong. I would suspect that people on that side of the panel would say that if I don't have confidence in the standard, I should err on the side of caution. In fact, Prof. Benatar said exactly this, that we should err on the side of caution in these sorts of things. I draw the line at a different point. For me, self-awareness is something that is a minimal standard for moral agency or for moral worth, in a sense, in this particular sense. And I think that I don't think we see a good reason to believe that certain animals, like chickens, have self-awareness. So I might be wrong, but that is my view.
Thank you, Jacques. There's a very chatty pocket at the back there. So, woman with the black. And then I want to come to the front here.
Okay. Okay, so if we can get off the consciousness, speciesism thing just for a second, okay, because we all know that's debatable forever. Okay, so we have this giant system on the planet going on. Industrial slaughter, it's going on everywhere. It's big, it's a big deal. We are over 7 billion people on the planet. So it's a lot of people to feed. My question is, as opposed to talking about social ethics for animals, which I agree with, I think it's all wrong, the system's broken, it's damaged, it's wrong. What about the people that are involved with the fabrication of those animals and the killing of those animals? Why hasn't this come up once?
I presume you're directing the question to...
Everyone.
Everyone. All right, I'll give this side. Okay. Yes, Nikki. Nikki will take this, and then we'll move.
I love that question. It's something that I personally feel very strongly about. If I can use an example, the Namibian seal slaughter. I don't know if you are all aware of what's happening over there, but every year Namibia decides in their great wisdom to slaughter seals, which they do not deem as animals, in their thousands, crudely clubbed to death by seasonal workers, poor seasonal workers, who get paid a pittance. And no studies are being done on the impact of killing an animal, a baby animal, especially a baby animal, must be extremely traumatic. And these people are poor. They're not inhuman. They're simply poor. They do have emotions. They do have, psychological problems, etc., etc. And no studies are being done in terms of what effect that violence has at home. I'm pretty sure that most people who are involved in the wholesale slaughter of animals, I'm not talking about Angus, people like you. I don't condone any death whatsoever, whether it is so-called humanely or what have you, but someone who raised an animal and they, just once off slit the throat. I'm talking about wholesale brutal slaughter. I'm pretty damn sure, without even being a statistician or a researcher or what have you, that those people have alcoholism problems, that there's violence at home, that they can't sustain long-term relationships, etc., etc. Well, the result is, in that community, for instance, in Namibia, the example that I'm talking about, where these people live in poverty, that entire community is affected by the violence that happens at home. And furthermore, it is scientifically proven. I mean, the FBI, the great big FBI, uses this as a measure to see serial killer patterns and violence patterns, that violence towards animals escalate into violence towards humans. There are studies have been done about domestic violence, where a lot of women who are abused by their husbands those husbands also have records of animal abuse. So we can only fathom, we can only start to imagine what trauma these people, the slaughterhouse workers, the clubbers, etc., what they must suffer at home. And we have an obligation to call our government on the breach of those human rights. If you don't care about the animals, fine. Well, nobody's going to put up their hands over here and say, I don't care. But then at least care about your fellow human beings and challenge the government on putting in better systems to protect those who are exposed to the trauma on a daily basis of slaughtering animals.
Okay, thank you for making your point cogently. I need to allow the people on my left, if they want to have a response. Otherwise, we do have a quick one. No? Okay, good. We have time pressures, so the gentleman here in the front.
Thank you. I've got a comment and a question. So my comment is really on why the book, The China Study, would be on the meat panel and not on the vegan side. Because, yes, it is true, meat lots, that point is supported by Campbell, but of course Campbell goes much further than that. Campbell is probably the most outspoken advocate for plant-based, whole food plant-based diets on the planet. And through Cornell University, the plant-based nutrition course that he has designed is currently the most popular university course in Cornell. And through his work with Oxford, Beijing, and Harvard, the case has been made to the point where even now, Kaiser Permanente in the States, which dwarfs Discovery, the home and sponsor of Tim Noakes over here, has taken and adopted Campbell's academic position that we need to shift immediately for our own health reasons towards a whole food plant-based diet, and that is Campbell's fact that comes through the China Study. So that's the comment. The question I have is maybe a little bit in Brett's field technologically, because of what can we do with food and technology. I saw that Bill Gates said, I've seen the future, and the future is vegan, and has started pumping a fortune into a company that is creating a meatless meat that by 2020 they anticipate and hope will reduce animal and protein consumption on the planet by 20%. And as we can all agree, both sides seem to agree that reducing suffering is key. And if that's the case, Gates says we shouldn't not eat meat. We should actually start eating meat from constituted plant-based sources. So we have an addiction culturally over the centuries. The texture of meat coming across our teeth is not something we want to give up. We have the desire for that. We want the taste for that. So let's not say, let's not eat meat. Let's say, let's eat meat, but not from animal sources. Let's eat meat from plant-based sources. If it's true, they've cracked the code, they found the Holy Grail, and there is a technology that can soon, or has already produced, a taste that can satisfy our desires, that is plant-based in nature, would you, as the panel advocating meat eating, if you were convinced that the texture, the taste, the satisfaction is there, and yet possibly there is less suffering on the planet, would you bring that onto your plates or into your restaurants? That's my question.
Thank you. Marco would like to respond, but I think you directed your question to Brett. But let's hear from Marco.
No. I think it's hypocritical. If you don't want to eat meat, you shouldn't eat something that looks or tastes like meat. I went to the vegetarian butcher in Amsterdam, and I discussed it with my brother. He said, do you think that's like a really amazing vegetable shop? And I said, no, I have a feeling it's pretending to be meat. And I had discussions in that shop, and people were, they really, I said, I don't understand why I'm eating chicken that's not chicken when I believe in not eating chicken, because you actually advocate an industry by eating that chicken. Then don't eat chicken. If you don't want to eat chicken, don't eat chicken, and don't eat something that looks or tastes like chicken, because it's hypocritical. come to my restaurant and I will serve you 8 courses of vegetarian or vegan food. It's possible. But if you don't want to eat meat, then I don't think, because of your beliefs, I don't think you should pretend to eat meat either.
Dank je wel. Brett?
I too went to the vegetarian butcher with my Dutch girlfriend, and I thought it was freaking awesome. I didn't stop eating meat because I didn't like the taste. I love meat. I think my sister actually reminded me quite recently how I used to braai on my own because my mom's a vegetarian, and if my stepdad was out of the house or on business or whatever, I would braai the meats on my own. So I didn't stop eating meat because I didn't like the taste. And the owner of my company started making fries because he had an addiction, which you alluded to. You said there's an addiction to meat, which we all have. Okay, so fries and Beyond Meat, which is what you're talking about. Beyond Meat is the company that Bill Gates has invested in. We are trying to produce something that will help you through that transition phase. We're trying to produce something that replicates the taste of meat to a certain extent so that you don't have to go cold turkey. Okay, you can try something that looks and tastes, it's got the same texture, that you'll start including in your diet. And we'll often find people come to us and say, I went vegetarian and I don't know what to eat, but then you had this thing that looked like a chicken burger, and I remember a chicken burger because that's what my mom used to make me, or mince bolognese or whatever. And then they go from that to eating more whole-based plant foods, which I completely agree is the way of the future. Whole-based plant foods is where we're going towards. We are also trying to introduce as a company whole-based plant foods, not just meat alternatives. But I think in the interim, meat, and again meat we put in inverted commas, but plant-based meats are going to start growing. The demand is growing. And there is a competitor that's come to South Africa, as well as us, and we are expanding into 25 countries around the world. So there is a demand. It will overtake eventually, and then we will be eating whole-based foods, plant-based foods, that is.
Thank you, Brett. I'm going to have to start winding up. I've got 3 hands up, 2 at the back. Let's start with the one up there, and then over here, and then one near the front. Have you got a mic at the back?
Yeah, I've got a mic here.
Go for it.
Angus, I'd like to direct this at you. I must first say, I think I really feel your pain. It must be very frustrating to sit there and being painted with the same brush as all the factory farms. I don't think anyone here would deny that your farm is 100,000 times better than any of those terrible operations. So I commend you on what I think you're doing is definitely a huge step forward. And I think the issue that many of us take or continue to take with what you're doing is merely that the cows have to die at the end of that process. But I want to be clear that we're not confusing 2 issues here. The second point I wanted to make was there is an alternative way of sequestering carbon, and you should maybe look up stock-free biodynamic farming. And you can produce soils that are storing carbon in the same way without having any animal input. So, yeah, it's a fallacy to think that the only way we can do that is with animals.
Can I respond to that?
Yes, Angus.
Well, thank you. Thank you for those encouraging words. And it's unfortunate you use the word fallacy, because Rudolf Steiner, who gave the lectures which created biodynamic agriculture, was very specific that you have to have cows on your farm. So perhaps your interpretation of biodynamics is different to the founders, but you can't be stock-free without cows. It's just, I don't know.
All right, thank you. There was another one at the back, right there. Thank you. And then one in the front somewhere.
Okay.
I think here.
I have a question and a statement. My question is for Nikki. You're going on about humanity and inhumanity, okay, and how humans are now something else. But in my honest opinion, I classify all humans same as any animal. Being an animal lover myself and also a meat eater, I've got a chicken at home, and yes, I have to say, unfortunately, yes, chickens do pass the mirror test. We've got one, we love her, her name's Princess Piri Piri. She lives in-house with us. And then also, on my statement I would like to make is that I think we're all missing the complete issue here. The big issue is not about should we eat meat, should we not eat meat, should not be in the menu. The big issue is why are we producing so much meat? And that's mainly, I would say, it's because we have overpopulation in the world. We've got a planet that is so populated that it actually cannot sustain itself, so we have to come and actually overbreed to actually feed everyone on the planet.
Thank you. I think I'll take that as a comment, unless anybody is burning to respond.
I want to know what your question is, because you said you had a question.
No, I'm just asking how you classify yourself. Do you classify yourself as a human, or as I would say, as everybody else is? We're all animals. Yet
Well, we can slap labels on anything that we want to. Scientifically, we are classified as humans, humans and non-humans. But if you want to classify yourself as an animal, or you see humans as animal, then I want to ask you, do you fornicate, urinate and defecate in public?
No, I do not.
Well, there we go. It's very easy. It's very easy and very convenient for us to say, well, we're not animals and animals are different to us. But when the argument is convenient to us to say, but animals are the same as us, and then it's like to defend your own point and say, well, animals aren't the same as us. A lot of people say, well, a lion eats a buck, so why can't we? And my question then is, well, then you need to fornicate in public, defecate in public, and urinate in public if you think you're an animal.
Can I just say why I wouldn't do that? It's mainly because it's illegal.
Sorry? Well, it depends on how you get your giggles, of course.
Okay, thank you. David, did you want to add something? No. All right. Yes, you've got the mic.
Something for Jacques Rousseau.
Sorry, can you keep the mic closer to you?
The first person, Jacques Rousseau.
Jacques, right?
Something that keeps catching my attention is when you mention the importance of self-awareness. In your statement earlier, you said that if the animals don't pass the murder test, then it is fine to eat them. But if I have to place an ill person in front of you that has lost the ability to understand themselves or to have their own self-awareness, would you eat that person?
That's a direct question, Jacques.
As I was saying earlier on, I wouldn't eat that person for aesthetic reasons. I have no moral obligation towards that person to not eat them. There are different ways of generating an outcome. In this case, I wouldn't have a moral obligation to not eat them, but I wouldn't do so because it would just feel weird. It would be an aesthetic thing. I'd be socialized into thinking that was gross.
But as I understand, there'd be nothing weird about it, because it's the same.
No, it's not the same. Emotionally, it's not the same. Logically, it's the same.
Emotionally, it's not the same, but
logically, they have the same moral status.
Feel pain. They also go through what we go through,
and
not even on our everyday life.
Right.
But if you're saying that emotionally it's not the same, I'd say you're wrong there.
All right. Maybe you can pick up this discussion afterwards. Is there any other? Yes.
This point about self-awareness, and let me grant you that a self-aware being might have more of an investment in its life than a non-self-aware being. But what makes you so confident that beings that lack self-awareness but are nonetheless thoroughly sentient have no interest in continued existence?
Because there's no being to make an investment.
What do you mean there's no being?
There's no investing self.
Well, no, you don't have to be self-aware in order to have some rudimentary selfhood. I mean,
not on my definition, no.
Why?
Because who's doing the investing? What's doing the investing in the future, or in interests, or in needs, or in wants, or whatever it might be?
It can be a kind of blind investment. In other words, you're unaware of it. So, for example, let's imagine I have somebody invest some money for me in some company. I have an investment in that, even though I'm not aware of it.
Yeah, and once you're made aware of it, then I would grant that it matters to you. Until you're aware of it, it doesn't matter to you.
Surely the company in which this investment has been made on my behalf, I can be harmed or benefited depending on its condition.
Not unless you know about it.
Well, that's a very controversial claim. The claim that you have to know about it in order for it to harm you or benefit you is an extremely controversial claim. Mm-hmm. And so if you're going to rest very important moral questions, like ones around killing, on a premise that is as contested as that, you're in very dangerous water.
Well, we need to go through the chain again, but I'm not resting on that premise, I'm resting on lack of self-awareness. And you've led me to that as an ancillary conclusion, which we need to investigate.
All right, we are nearing the end of our time, so I'm going to take maybe one or two burning questions. You've had your hand up here, the lady in the purple. Any other really burning?
Hi.
Okay, you have the mic, then I'll come back to you.
It is working.
Then to the second row with the mic, please. Go ahead.
My name is Carmen, and anybody can answer the question. I'm a vegetarian, and I have a dog, and I feel very guilty feeding my dog dog food that contains meat in it. And I was just wondering if there is any alternative, maybe a vegetarian alternative that I could feed my dog so that he would be healthy. And then I'd also want to know if meat is off the menu, then how would our pets and our dogs survive? Who would produce the meat that we have for the dog food?
Okay, I think there's an answer up here. Is that right? Can you give him a mic? Give him the mic, please. Can you get a mic to him? Can you give him the mic for the recording?
So your main question was, how do you feed your dogs a vegan diet? All right. Obviously, there's been a local producer, Vondi's, for quite some time that do a vegan product. And for the last almost a year, I've been importing a product called Benevo, which is completely vegan, completely animal friendly. I've got 2 dogs, a Cocker Spaniel and an Aussie Shepherd, and they are perfectly healthy and they've been vegan for almost a year. So there's your answer.
Thank you. A little marketing exercise. But
sorry, I had to say it with an answer.
This is just out of my interest. I am aware that you can feed a dog a vegan diet quite healthy. You can actually thrive.
And a cat.
Okay, that was my question.
You can with taurine. Yeah, cats need taurine. They don't produce it themselves in their digestive system. Dogs do. Mm-hmm. So a cat needs to have a taurine supplement in the food. And the product that I import does have a taurine supplement. So cats can, and I have customers buying the product and feeding their cats on the product, as do the rest of the world who buy not just our product, but other products as well. So cats can be vegan. Okay.
Thank you. Just before we go on, you have by now filled in and handed in your little slip, and we will get the results out to you before we all leave. There was... Sorry, I can't see. In the front here? Second row. Yes, the lady in the... Okay. Go ahead, please.
Thanks. Just two quick points. Also directed, towards Jacques. The one is sort of a comment. It's your claim about if you can kill an animal humanely. My concern is that I think as humans we're very bad at judging what constitutes humane treatment of animals because we're so brought up not considering their interests. So I've sat on many animal ethics committees where things that are done to experimental animals that would turn your hair up, and the people on the Animal Ethics Committee are swearing to you that these have all passed the appropriate tests and are absolutely humane. And it's a kind of pragmatic point, but I think it has very important practical implications. The other point is just to sort of carry on with the discussion about this importance of self-awareness, and here's just something else to throw out that maybe you can think about. So you seem to take it as a given that we have a moral obligation to take care of an animal's interests. Right? So one of the reasons we should not cause an animal pain is because an animal has an interest in not being caused pain. So one of the reasons that you might think that an animal has an interest in the continuation of life is because we think that one of the purposes of sentience is directed towards the preservation of life. That's the reason that animals run away from pain, is because it's self-preserving. So one of my concerns is that your position seems a little bit self-contradictory for you to say, well, we have a moral obligation to be aware and to take cognizance of an animal's interests, but that towards which the animal's interests are directed, we have no moral obligation whatsoever to take cognizance of, and that just strikes me as perhaps contradictory.
Thank you for that question, Jacques.
Briefly, I agree with you entirely on the desensitization possibility you sketched. I would just raise the thought that there can be an oversensitivity as well. So I think in general you're right that people are desensitized to that. On the second point, firstly, I'm aware of a naturalistic fallacy sort of tendency there. So yes, we do want to live. I'm not sure that entails a right to live. But more to the point, I also worry about, I mean, as you'd be well aware, the potentiality sorts of arguments. I mean, that rebuttal seems to me to rest on the gamble that they are going to have lots of pleasure in future, or that they're going to live good lives, in a sense. And if we grant that, then don't we undermine the potentiality argument, which we normally reject in other cases?
No, I don't think there's a contradiction there at all. In the same sense, for example, that with humans, we think that generally it would be immoral to end the life of a human, even if there's no guarantee that the human's going to have a good life, unless we're pretty sure that the human's not going to have a good life. So euthanasia, we think, is morally perhaps permissible. Of course, we hold those same standards to animals. We would euthanize an animal if the chances that it's going to have a very unhappy life are greater. So I don't see why there's any...
Okay, no,
and I'm not committing the naturalistic fallacy, because I'm not saying that as a matter of evolutionary fact. I'm saying as a matter of a kind of psychological capacities.
I would grant that they clearly would in that limited sense want, but want, of course, here is not a intentional want. It's not. They would want to live. I just wouldn't regard that as trumping my wanting to eat them.
All right, thank you. we must start ending off, and I hope just one last question here, second row in the front, and then we'll finish off.
Hi. I hope I do the last question justice. So this is directed at the against taking meat off the menu. It was said in the beginning, farmer by proxy and freedom of choice, and we should keep it on the menu because it's freedom of choice and all that. But I think what we've debated here tonight is all the people here are very educated and we have the ability to make the choice, and we know we don't know all the facts, but we are aware that there's a choice to be made. But I think the majority of people don't question, and the majority of people don't ask these questions that we are asking today. So isn't keeping the meat on the menu just as bad as taking it off? Because keeping it on the menu means that people who don't ask the questions aren't going to ask the questions, and that kind of making the choice for them as well. And I'm vegetarian, but I don't believe in taking meat off the menu.
I think we have the responsibility to educate people, not just blindly serve meat because we think that's what people want. And I think that's why I feel strongly about not taking it off the menu, but serving it with morality, a nice side dish of morality, and educating. We have to educate the masses. I don't think the problem lies in this room. There's enough questioning in this room. But if we want to solve the problem, then we've got to educate the masses. We've got to educate Joe Soap that goes for lunch at McDonald's.
All right, thank you. I'd like to end off now. I'm looking for Muriel just for her guidance. What my idea is to give each panelist 1 minute to wind up. Would that be in order if they want to? 2 minutes? 1 minute, 1 to 2 minutes. I want to go in reverse order and start with David. 1 minute, plus minus. Two.
So I just want to reiterate and clarify one or 2 points, and that is that there are no knockdown arguments that death is a harm to everybody or to anybody. And there are no knockdown arguments that I can offer that killing a being that is not self-aware harms that being. There are no knockdown arguments of that kind, so we can't settle that this evening. But there are questions here about what we should do in the light of that measure of uncertainty. If you accept Jacques Rousseau's position, then there is nothing intrinsically wrong with taking the life of a human being that lacks this higher order cognitive capacity, that would fail the self-awareness test, for example. And that is a conclusion that I think we should have a great deal of difficulty accepting. We should certainly have a great deal of difficulty thinking that it would be okay for us to go out now and kill beings of those kinds. The only way that Jacques Rousseau can ward off an argument of that kind is either to appeal to his particular sentiments, and I want to ignore that because we can just have sentimental differences. The other is to say that we've got some kind of duty to our conspecifics, and that is an extremely tenuous supposition, because why should we stipulate that the duty is to your conspecific, to your fellow human being, rather than to your fellow sentient being? We need to hear an argument of that kind. Why is it the case that human beings constitute a moral community, even when the human beings are those who are not themselves moral agents?
Thank you, David. Continuing in reverse order, Jacques.
Well, I mean, I would just say that
I've noted them down.
if we were to change our minds about where to draw the line between the risks we're willing to take and the risks we're not willing to take in terms of the harms that we do, then one of the things that could guide us, I mean, I understand, I note David's challenge and understand David's challenge. However, I would say that there's a big difference. It's not just the conspecific or the emotional argument. If I were to take a utilitarian view of the world and accept that people and society will suffer severe trauma by us starting to eat our grandmothers, our senile grandmothers and our children, we don't yet have that point of view with regards to non-human animals. Whether we're right or wrong about that is one issue, which I'll park for the moment. But the fact that we believe that means that it doesn't cause disruption and emotional harms and so forth. And if we were to start eating our babies and so forth, it would. So on a purely pragmatic level, I don't think that I need to embrace the whole-scale slaughter and consumption of infants and hold that we can sometimes kill non-human animals.
Thank you, Jacques. Nikki, closing points you want to make?
Yeah, I had a slide, so I need your participation here. I want everybody to close their eyes, and I want you to imagine 2 plates. Both plates contain a piece of raw meat, exact same cut, blah, 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 blah. Who here, with a show of hands, would be able to tell me which piece of meat was raised humanely and was killed humanely, and which one was factory farmed and was killed brutally? Anybody? Not you, them. Okay. The second point that I'm trying to make is, again, close your eyes and imagine 2 puddles of blood. Just blood on the floor. Who can tell me which one is human and which one is animal? Anyone? The same life force that courses through your veins courses through theirs. And then a final question. Does anybody here know what the biggest marine predator on the planet is? Cows. We are so twisted and perverse as a human race that we turned cows into the biggest marine predators on this planet.
Thank you. Marco?
Yeah, I think I agree a lot with what you say, Nikki, and I think that's exactly my point. Make sure you do know what the difference is between those 2 pieces of raw meat, because you can see it. And that's where, if every fillet in the supermarket is the same color and the same size, don't buy it. If on a menu it says Karen beef, don't think it's some fashion statement. It's terrible. It's a feedlot. It shouldn't be said. Shouldn't be used. It's not made by farmers. It's made by people in laboratory coats wielding injections. I won't eat it. I will not, because it's not good for me. And that is my point. As much as you have the right not to eat it, I think I have the right to choose what I want to put in my body, and I do so with great respect. Thank you.
Thank you. Brett.
The population is set to grow to about 10 billion people and by, I think, 2050. We can feed them with a vegetarian diet right now. Right now we can feed all those people. What we cannot do it is through meat. If we had to halve our consumption of meat and make it a sustainable source, a free-range source, emissions would stay the same. Right now, 51% of all greenhouse gases are caused by livestock. Dropping meat off the menu is the single biggest thing you can do to make a difference for the environment. It's a simple choice, and what you do at the dinner table makes a difference. So make the right choice.
Thank you, Brett. Last but not least, Angus.
Thanks to everyone for being here. Thanks, Jan, for chairing us. 5 points. We're all farmers by proxy.
2 minutes.
Ag is bad. Regenerative agriculture reverses bad agriculture, and livestock are critical to that. Can't be done without livestock. There's never been despite Bill Gates, and I'd love to have had an opportunity to answer the Bill Gates question. He supports chemical, genetically modified agriculture, which is the biggest problem. Despite what Bill Gates and these guys say, this remains the greatest dietary study of all, and there have never been healthy vegetarian societies. And then 5, we are all farmers by proxy.
Thank you very much. Well, that fulfills one of my 2 closing tasks, that is to thank the panelists for your participation and your input, and you're very enthusiastic. And I've learned a lot from you guys and the audience, so thank you. You've stimulated me, and I think everybody's enjoyed the debate. I think my last task, Muriel, am I right? Where's Muriel? Yeah, is to announce the results. Is that right? Is there anything else before I do that? So the organizers, including Muriel, did a very interesting thing. They took a poll before you arrived and one during the question time. And it's interesting to say, I've got 2 results for you, basically. What the views of the audience were prior to and if they changed. So before, and if I can call them the meat-eating inclined people, the people that voted against the motion, should animals be off South African menus, those are the meat-inclined. Before, 60% voted for the meat-inclined group, whereas afterwards, 71% voted for. The other way around. Sorry, 71% voted. You tell us. You tell the audience. 60% voted for the motion before, and 71 voted for the motion afterwards. So the vegetarians swayed the group, right? All right.